The culture is my shepherd. I am always wanting more. I stumble from mall to mall, job to job, and shrink to shrink, seeking relief, but never finding any. I am trapped in the valley of the shadow of death and feel sorry for myself. I fear everything from processed food to power lines. I go down to the weekly staff meeting and am surrounded by people who seem out to get me. I go home and even the dog scowls at me. I anoint my headache with extra strength Tylenol. My beer mug runneth over. Surely misery and misfortune will always be my lot, and I will live in self-doubt and pain for the rest of my lonely life. Or try this one out. I'm on my own. No one looks out for me or protects me. I experience a continual sense of need. Nothing's quite right. I'm always restless. I'm easily frustrated and often disappointed. It's a jungle. I feel overwhelmed. It's a desert. I'm thirsty. My soul feels broken, twisted, and stuck. I can't fix myself. I stumble down some dark paths. Still, I insist. I want to do what I want, when I want, how I want. But life's confusing. Why don't things ever really work out? I'm haunted by emptiness and futility, shadows of death. I fear the big hurt, the final loss. Death is waiting for me at the end of every road, but I'd rather not think about that. I spend my life protecting myself. Bad things can happen. I find no lasting comfort. I'm alone, facing everything that could hurt me. Are my friends really my friends? Other people use me for their own ends. I can't really trust anyone. No one has my back. No one is really for me except me. And I'm so much all about me, sometimes it's sickening. I belong to no one except myself. My cup is never quite full enough. I'm left empty. Disappointment follows me all the days of my life. Will I just be obliterated into nothingness? Will I be alone forever, homeless, free-falling into a void? Sartre said, hell is other people. I have to add, hell is also myself. It's a living death. And then I die. Or how about this one? The clock is my dictator. I shall not rest. It makes me lie down only when exhausted. It leads me into deep depression. It hounds my soul. It leads me in circles of frenzy for activity's sake. Even though I run frantically from task to task, I will never get it all done. For my ideal is with me. Deadlines and my need for approval, they drive me. They demand performance from me beyond the limits of my schedule. They anoint my head with migraines. My in-basket overflows. Surely fatigue and time pressures shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the bonds of frustration forever. So I just read you 3 rewritten versions of Psalm 23, a psalm that many of us know by heart, right? And you may have noticed that in many ways it was the exact opposite of that great psalm of trust, that psalm we know and love. The first rewritten version was by Jim Abramson, the second by David Paulson, and the third by an anonymous author. You could all probably write your own anti-Psalm 23. I wonder, as you listened to these psalms, I shall not rest, the clock is my dictator. The culture is my shepherd, I am always on my own. I am on my own, no one looks out for me. I wonder, as you listened to those psalms, if that anti-psalm, or the psalm we know and love, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, I wonder which of those is more true to your reality right now, reflects your lived reality more right now. And I can't answer that for you. Maybe some days it's one, and other days the other. Sometimes listening to retirees, I notice how hectic and stressful and filled with busyness their lives continue to be. Sometimes listening to people that I would consider well off, I notice how filled with dissatisfaction and craving and want they continue to be. Sometimes listening to people of faith, I notice how filled with fear they continue to be. Sometimes listening to people in our age of constant connectivity and the World Wide Web, I notice how much loneliness continues to be in their voice. You know, for many of us, Psalm 23, like the Lord's Prayer, is one of those favorite passages that we have tucked away in our memory. And we carry it around with us for those hard moments in life when we want to pull it out. We pull it out at memorial services and hospital bedsides, and those times in life when we feel scared. Except, as Walter Brueggemann notes, sometimes, far from comforting us, this psalm can be a little disorienting. It can be disorienting because of its uncompromising trust and faith. You know, that doesn't always match what's going on in our own hearts, our own experience, our own lived reality. And sometimes we're really quite skeptical of people who are so sure of God and so sure of themselves. But perhaps that's what this psalm is meant to do. Maybe it's meant to crash into our reality, where the culture is our shepherd, or the clock, or where we feel like no one is our shepherd. Perhaps it's meant to crash into us, jar us, and dare us to trust that we do have a shepherd. Perhaps it's meant to crash into our fears, to crash into our wanting, to crash into our despair, and invite us to something different. It's almost as if this beloved psalm of ours confronts us with a question. Are you going to step into the kingdom of God? Are you going to step into the beloved community of God? Or are you going to stay right where you are, locked in fear, isolated in shame, controlled by anger? I haven't watched the show Lost, but I stumbled across a really powerful clip this morning that I'll show you in a minute. I read a bit more about the character in this scene, Echo. He was originally cast as an upstanding, faith-filled priest from Nigeria. But when the actor they found to play the role was such a strong actor, they decided that the character needed some more depth and complexity. So in an episode entitled, "The Lord is My Shepherd," we find ourselves in a flashback to the Nigerian village in which he was raised. And children are at play as the scene suddenly turns to chaos and fear and confusion. A group of guerrilla soldiers have come riding into the village. And an older teenage boy, who we will soon discover is a young Echo, wraps his arms protectively around a much younger boy, who we learn is his brother. But when the guerrillas enter the village, they come and they grab that young boy out of his arms. And they put a gun in his hands. And they tell him he has to shoot this older man from the village. The gun looks enormous in this little boy's hands, and he hesitates. And then his big brother Echo steps in, takes the gun, and shoots the man. The guerrillas, impressed, take Echo off to be a child soldier. And they yank off the cross he's wearing around his neck and toss it on the ground. His brother picks up the cross and puts it on his own neck as he watches the guerrilla soldiers ride off with his brother. Well, eventually Echo grows up to become a powerful warlord. But his brother, whom he spared from having to kill someone, becomes a priest. Echo is trying to smuggle drugs out of the country, and it turns out that the only people who really have freedom of transportation and exiting and entering the country are priests. And so he goes to his brother for help, and his brother, Yemi is his name, refuses at first. But eventually, after Echo threatens him, he agrees that he will help him in this smuggling business. Still, Yemi tries to convince his brother not to go through with this big drug deal that he's in the middle of. And when Yemi goes to stop him, he ends up getting shot by some other warlords. They pull his body into a plane, and the plane takes off, and Echo is left behind. And from that point forward, Echo decides to replace his brother as a priest. But always, to some extent, it feels like a fraud to him. In the scene we're about to watch, Echo has just discovered a body at the site of a plane crash. And on the body he finds that cross that he had worn as a child. And he knows that it's his brother, Yemi. He weeps over the body, and then he sets the plane on fire. And that's where we pick up today.
So, are you a priest or aren't you? Yes, I am. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me.
Like Echo's companion, Psalm 23 asks us, who are you? And who are you going to be? And do you know who your God is? right now, in the midst of your fear, your despair, your loneliness, your shame, or maybe just the monotony and the relentlessness of life, when anything and everything but God seems to be your shepherd, do you remember who God is and the path and the table to which God has called you? Do you remember? It invites us to that table of God's abundance. But you know, half the battle is just showing up. And that's what we heard in the parable that Jesus tells about the kingdom of God. Half the battle is just showing up. In our conversation with the kids, we talked about all sorts of reasons, right? That people don't show up to a feast, don't show up to that table God has set before us. But we always end up at some table, and often we end up at tables we'd rather not be at. So today I invite you to the feast of God's love. I invite you to hear and to pray anew this psalm that we love so much. This psalm that sometimes for us is a statement of faith, and sometimes for us is a prayer seeking faith. Come to that table where even our enemies are present, but there is an abundance that runs over. Set out once more on that path of God where there is still yet shadowy valleys, but also a shepherd to guide us through. Let this psalm this morning crash into you on whatever path you are on, wherever you are on life's journey, at whatever table you are sitting at, whatever shepherd you are following. And let this psalm invite you once more into something new, this thing called the kingdom of God that is already here among us, but is not yet fully realized. This morning, dare to show up and dare to join the joy of the kingdom of God. May God be with us as we try. Amen.